I watched you last night with Sharpton, okay? And just the look on his face when you came out and said, well, what racial profiling? And I'm sure African Americans across the country were saying, what is this woman talking about? Explain.
It's not that it's never happened. I've just been watching, the gusher of cliches on television about this. I mean, there was no racial profiling in this case in Boston, unless you're talking about Professor Gates racially profiling an Irish cop and assuming he must be a racist. There was some racial profiling that way. But, I write about this in Guilty, and I only give an abbreviated list in Guilty, although it goes on for pages and pages, of all of the alleged acts of racism or racial profiling that turn out to be hoaxes. And I mean, as far back in our lifetimes as the Tawanny Brawley case, there was the case with the Exeter kid. And at first, you have to read all the headlines at first. Why would this Exeter kid have mugged an undercover cop? And then, all the facts come out. They get witnesses. They have the autopsy. Yeah, actually, the Exeter honor student on his way to Stanford did mug an undercover cop, and the grand jury acquitted. You had the one with a black kid who was carrying a machete. The cop thought it was a gun. Again, acquitted by the grand jury after hysterical headlines throughout the New York Times. You had the Claremont McKenna woman, a white woman. A lot of these times, these are whites who are seeking racial reconciliation, and they claim they come under attack. The Claremont professor who vandalized her own car with anti-Semitic and racist graffiti. There are witnesses who saw her doing it. You bring it right up to recently, Columbia University, the black professor who hung the noose, suspiciously, it seems that she's probably the one who hung the noose, and the case quietly goes away.
That one.
To the Duke lacrosse case. To the Duke lacrosse case, where, there was racial profiling, there was athletic profiling of the allegedly rich young frat boy. So I'm just saying, before, every time one of these comes up, you have liberals saying, well, okay, it wasn't true in this case, but we still have an epidemic of racial profiling. Well, they got to start having their cases not turn out to be hoaxes before they can say that. What we seem to have a rash and epidemic of.
Yeah, what about the ACLU lawsuit against Maryland? I mean, Maryland State Police, and the ACLU sued, and there was a settlement, an out-of-court settlement, essentially an admission on the part of Maryland that they do stop African-American drivers in some type of pattern that I guess some people believe is profiling.
Right. What they compare these stops to is the percentage of blacks in the population, which, if you think about it, is obviously absurd. I mean, just to take one example in another category, shootings, in an article by Heather McDonald this week, she releases the astonishing statistic that 82% of the shootings in New York City, the shooter is black. Less than 1% is the shooter white. And that's with more whites than blacks in New York City. So if cops are looking for, if there's been a shooting, the witnesses are probably very likely to say it was a black who did the shooting. It turns out it's the same thing with these highway patrols. There is an absolute scientific study in New Jersey, and I don't think blacks are slowing their cars down when they get from New Jersey to Maryland, where they did the same thing. They compared the black numbers in the population to the number of blacks speeding. Finally, the highway patrol got so fed up with being called racist, and by everyone, especially the Clinton administration, they encouraged the Attorney General of New Jersey to conduct a scientific survey of this. So what the scientific survey did, rather than just comparing numbers in the population, they set up a camera and they clocked cars, photos of the drivers as they're going by, and what the speed was. They had one group of people determine what the race of the driver was, without knowing what the speed was. And it turns out, if anything, the New Jersey Highway Patrol was stopping not enough blacks. Blacks speed more. Now, it could be because blacks tend to be a younger demographic, and you get younger people who speed more. But the point is, it wasn't racial profiling.
And it's so explosive even to have this conversation, because once you start having this conversation, people from all walks of life start saying, "Oh, you can't believe this. You can't really believe what you're saying because my black friends say they've been stopped and they've been stopped unfairly." So there's a perception issue, even if it's not grounded, I think, what you're saying in the reality of what the cases are. Can I ask you about the Crowley issue yesterday, the big beer summit and so forth? He didn't get an apology from either Gates. Apparently Gates wanted an apology from Officer Crowley. Crowley didn't give it, Gates didn't give it, and Obama didn't give it. So what was the teachable moment, very quickly?
Right. I think the teachable moment should be applied to the cop who did send an email in an intemperate moment, exploding at a journalist. I mean, he turns out to be the Emmanuel Goldstein of the week. Liberals are bitterly disappointed that Sergeant Crowley, they couldn't find anything on him suggesting he's a racist, so they get this one cop who sends a stupid, immature, intemperate email, and now he's apologizing all over the place. If Gates isn't going to apologize, how about a little fairness for this guy doing something immature and irrational, too?
Ann, thanks a lot. It's good to see you.